He saved the world and got stabbed in the back. Now reborn as a spoiled noble in a dark magic bloodline, Chris has 2 years to live, a world to save, and one hell of a plan. Rule the underworld or die trying. So the story kicks off with a guy who feels like he's failed. He's full of regret, blaming himself for not being strong enough. He thinks someone else should have taken the lead instead of him. But the people around him remind him that he gave it his all. Turns out, he's the chosen hero. But things didn't go as planned. There was someone in the group who was super talented, the kind of person who's good at everything but never really got the spotlight. He wasn't the main guy, but he still managed to become a legend in his own right. His journey started when he was just 20 after he ran away from his family, chasing dreams of making it big while surviving in the rough parts of town. One day, chaos broke out. A huge threat appeared from a distant land, a powerful enemy that brought destruction wherever it went. While everyone else was freaking out, our guy saw a chance. There was a team forming to fight alongside a hero, and he decided to go for it, hoping it would bring him fame and fortune. But things didn't go the way he imagined. The good guys lost, and the enemy took over everything. In the middle of that defeat, the hero wished he could go back and change who got chosen to lead the fight. One of his old teammates heard this and thought there was no point wishing. They were out of time, and everything was ending. As they all looked up, knowing the end was near, the man silently hoped that in another life, if such a thing existed, he could be born into an easy life with comfort and wealth. Suddenly, the story jumps. The man wakes up in a new body. He's been reborn as the son of a powerful family in a kingdom that uses dark magic. From what he figures out, he's been sent back in time about 15 years, just before everything went bad in the previous timeline. He realizes he now lives in one of the major clans that control the empire, and surprisingly, the place is peaceful, with magical creatures casually going about their day. What really shocks him, though, is who he's become. The new body belongs to someone known for being a spoiled troublemaker, someone who always caused drama and didn't have the best reputation. And just like that, his second chance begins. But this time, he's got memories from the future and a whole new identity. So here's what's going on. Chris finds himself stuck in a tough spot. The guy whose body he now lives in, yeah, that guy didn't exactly have a great ending. Word is his own relatives took him out. Not exactly the life of luxury Chris was hoping for when he wished to be reborn rich. Now he's sweating just thinking about it, wondering how he ended up in the shoes of someone marked for death. He tries to calm himself, thinking maybe if he keeps a low profile, he can dodge the fate that's coming. After all, he's now part of a super wealthy and well-known family. He figures he might as well enjoy the good life while it lasts. But reality slaps him in the face real quick. He remembers what's coming. Total chaos. The end of the world. The same disaster that destroyed everything in his past life. And the one behind it all? A ruthless demon king who used the war to feed a twisted plan that led to the apocalypse. The worst part? The magical empire he's now a part of is crawling with powerful folks who follow that demon king without question. If Chris wants to survive this time around, he knows what he has to do. Get strong. Not just strong, but stronger than the demon king himself. The only way to make that happen? Become the top dog. Rule the empire. He's got 5 years before everything goes downhill, and he decides he's going to use that time to rise to the top. Just as he's making this plan, his father, who is strict and scary, calls him out. Chris had apparently done something wild not too long ago, and his dad is furious he dared to show his face. If he messes up again, it's game over. But Chris knows he needs to start changing people's views of him if he wants to pull off his plan. He puts on his most serious attitude, admits all his past mistakes, and says he wants to make things right. His dad doesn't buy it. He's heard it all before. And honestly, Chris doesn't even remember what his past self did since he only woke up in this body 3 days ago. Still, Chris insists he's changed, and he asks to be sent to a place called the Punishment Cave. It's basically a prison for powerful people, designed to break them mentally by cutting off all their senses. A few days there is tough, but Chris wants to stay an entire month. The cave is awful, but it's the perfect place for him to disappear from everyone's eyes and plan his next move without distractions. His dad is doubtful. He doesn't think Chris can even last one day in there, but agrees to give him a final chance. If Chris fails to prove himself, he'll be kicked out of the family. That's a death sentence on its own, since people would be lining up to take him out the moment he loses that protection. Chris knows the risk, but he's willing to take it. He says that if he can prove he's truly changed, he wants something in return. His dad finds that bold, but agrees to hear him out, only if he really shows he's a different person this time. After some time passes, Chris is back in his room, when the butler shows up to let him know that the punishment cave is ready. The guy's name is Cox, and he's a half-vampire. As Chris walks out with him, all the staff start whispering behind their backs. They're shocked that Chris volunteered to go into the cave. Everyone's suspicious, thinking it's just another one of his shady tricks. They still remember the mess he caused recently when he embarrassed the family in front of another powerful clan. The head of the family had to step in and fix it himself. Everyone's losing hope that Chris will ever grow up. They even start betting on how long he'll last in the cave. Most think he won't even make it past 2 days. But Chris walks past them, smiling to himself while someone watches from the shadows. Turns out it's his younger brother. At the entrance of the cave, Cox tells him they've arrived. There's a statue guarding the place, but it turns out it's not a statue at all. It's an undead knight standing guard. Pretty on brand for the creepy magic empire, but Chris doesn't mind, as long as it keeps people from disturbing him. Just then, his younger brother shows up. He's smart, disciplined, and apparently a golden child in the family. The guy wastes no time and pulls out a sword, stopping it just inches from Chris's throat. Chris stands his ground without reacting on the outside, but inside, he's freaking out. His brother's warning is clear. Mess up again and he's done for. Chris recognizes him from his past life. He was known for using terrifying magic. Right now, he's just a well-trained kid, but Chris has seen worse in his old life. He doesn't argue, just brushes past him and walks straight into the cave, ignoring the awkwardness he leaves behind. The brother's clearly irritated, yelling at Cox about Chris's attitude. Once inside, things get real. Chris can't see or hear anything, and the only sensation left is a light tingling in his fingers. It's designed to make prisoners feel isolated while still being able to feed themselves or handle tools. Most people would lose their minds in a place like this, but for Chris, it's actually perfect. He's used to way worse from his days exploring ruins and dungeons. The sensory deprivation gives him a chance to focus completely on fixing his body. It's not going to be easy. He needs time, effort, and a little luck. But he's got a plan. He's bringing in all the knowledge he gained before, from advanced healing techniques to rare training methods. Plus, he managed to get his hands on some powerful magic stones, something that would have been impossible in his old life. He starts with a white magic stone, which is meant to clean out the toxins in his body. It's boring and painful work, but it's necessary. One wrong move and it'll feel like 1,000 needles stabbing him at once, but he takes it in stride like it's nothing new. Meanwhile, outside, Cox gives a report to Chris's father. The old man is wondering if he went too far by sending Chris in. He remembers when Chris was a bright kid with a lot of potential, and it makes him question how things went so wrong. Maybe it was talent that turned into arrogance, or maybe he just snapped. Either way, he feels torn between anger and disappointment. Then Cox admits there's a bit of a problem. Chris took some dangerous magic stones into the cave, including one that causes hallucinations. There's no telling what it'll do to him. Cox thinks they should open the cave and pull him out immediately, but Chris's father refuses. In his mind, if Chris wants to throw his life away, so be it. He's already given him enough chances. A whole month passes. Chris is still inside. As the doors to the punishment cave slowly opened, Chris's father expected to find a broken mess, but instead, he was shocked by the sight before him. Chris stood there, calm and confident, looking nothing like the person he used to be. He greeted his father, proud of how far he'd come, reminding him that he promised to return a better man. His father was so stunned that his eyes welled up. It reminded him of how Chris looked when he was a young boy, full of fire and hope. But he quickly pushed those emotions aside, warning Chris not to get cocky just because he made it through one challenge. He still didn't trust him fully. Chris took that as motivation, saying he'd just work harder to earn that trust. What his father didn't know was that Chris didn't just survive in that cave, he thrived. He'd been so focused on rebuilding himself that he never even had time to feel bored. His main goal was to craft the perfect body for swordsmanship, and thanks to the tools he brought with him, he was able to do just that. The white energy stone helped bring his body to life in ways he didn't think were possible. Every part of him felt renewed. And then there was the hallucination stone. Though risky, it turned out to be a huge help. The strange visions it caused actually pushed his training even further, allowing him to make massive progress in a short amount of time. Chris even went beyond that. He managed to develop not one, but 2 energy centers inside his body. To keep one of them hidden, he used one power to mask the other, knowing that if word got out, the magical world would go wild. But his father still played it cool, not wanting to show that he was impressed. What surprised Chris the most was how one of the stones acted weird during his stay. It felt like someone had tampered with it, trying to mess with his head and make him lose control. But instead of falling apart, he used it to take his abilities to the next level. He embraced the chaos and turned it into strength. Now that he had proven himself, Chris asked for a reward. He wanted access to a top-tier training ground known for shaping the strongest fighters in the dark magic world. His father wasn't too thrilled with the idea. That place was meant only for the elite, and Chris had a long history of screwing things up. But Chris made it clear he didn't want to join them. He just wanted to train where real warriors trained, hoping it would inspire him to go further. After thinking it over, his father finally gave him the green light, but not without a warning. He better not embarrass himself in front of such highly respected fighters. Chris had one more thing he wanted to ask his dad, which caught him off guard. The story jumps to the training ground, where all the other trainees were side-eyeing Chris, clearly judging him. They didn't hold back, whispering and mocking him. But Chris figured that was normal in a place like this. Here, power meant more than a fancy last name. Still, he had a reason for coming. Turns out, his second request was about getting into the family's private library. His dad said that to get in, he'd need a letter from Deputy Commander Melon. That place was where all the secret dark magic knowledge was kept, and no one could access it without permission. Chris agreed, but asked why it was so complicated when he was part of the family. That's when his dad reminded him about how, in the past, he apparently tried to sell some of the rare stuff on the black market. Chris was stunned. He couldn't believe how badly the previous version of him had messed up. Still, none of that mattered right now. His main focus was getting Melon to approve him. At the training ground, Chris spotted his younger brother, Thane, who clearly wasn't happy to see him. Thane, backed by a group of trainees, made it clear Chris wasn't welcome there. But Chris didn't see it as a problem. If anything, it was the perfect chance to prove himself. Thane warned him again to leave, saying he didn't want to waste the second chance he got after surviving the punishment cave. Chris simply reminded him that it was their dad who allowed him in, so he had every right to be there. Thane didn't expect that. Then a strong presence entered the scene. Melon, the deputy commander. Judging by the pressure she gave off, she was no joke. Chris greeted her respectfully, and she was surprised he didn't flinch under her energy. He explained he wanted to earn the right to train there and had a way to prove himself. His idea? Defeat one of the other trainees in a fight. Melon didn't take it seriously at first, but Chris insisted. He asked her not to use any dark energy since his own reserves were still weak. Instead, he wanted a basic hand-to-hand fight. Melon thought it was risky, especially since Chris was technically the heir, but agreed to let him try. Chris looked around for an opponent and decided on Thane. Melon didn't think it was a good match since Thane was a level 2, which was impressive for someone his age. Chris explained that talent didn't care about age. Whether someone was 13 or 30, if they didn't have what it took, they'd never reach that level. Still, Chris wasn't just anybody. He figured that if he was going to prove something, he might as well go all out and take on someone stronger than him. He asked Thane directly, teasing him a bit. Thane, clearly annoyed, accepted the challenge. Everyone formed a circle around them, cheering Thane on and telling him to crush Chris. They even threatened to put him through extra drills if he didn't do a good enough job. Chris checked the rules with Melon, and she said they'd fight until one of them couldn't keep going. Melon even muttered that it might be a good idea to take out Chris's legs. Chris, on the other hand, was just poking fun at Thane, saying he was going to get wrecked. Thane, furious at being mocked, charged in. But while he was caught up in his anger, Chris moved fast and landed a solid hit before Thane could react. The blow came out of nowhere and completely threw him off. As the fight kicked off, Chris casually asked what was going on, acting like nothing had happened. Thane got back up and angrily swung at him. Chris, though, pointed out how unfair it was. A guy like him without any dark energy getting thrown against someone who clearly had the upper hand. But in close combat, that was Chris's comfort zone. He had experience from more battles than anyone here could imagine. He threw a clean hit to Thane's gut without much effort. Even though he hadn't reached a proper level in dark magic yet, his light powers alone were strong enough to match up. Some of the other trainees stood around in shock, not understanding how Chris was winning so easily. Thane was doubled over, and Chris couldn't help but mess with him, making fun of him like an older sibling who'd had enough. Thane asked what kind of trick he pulled, but Chris made it clear there were no tricks. He just wasn't as weak as they thought. As Chris kept teasing him, Thane started to get mad for real. A dark energy surrounded his hand, and he charged in, full of rage. Chris dodged the hit and admitted Thane was faster than expected, finally showing some fight. Thane kept swinging, but Chris calmly avoided each one. Then, Chris cut off the energy surrounding Thane's body like it was nothing and landed a strong uppercut that dropped him instantly. The crowd around them couldn't believe what just happened. Some whispered maybe Thane held back or got distracted, but Melon, watching closely, understood it was no accident. Chris had clearly outclassed him. Chris stood tall and said he'd proven his point, and Melon agreed. He kept a cool face, but deep down he was relieved it actually worked. Now he was ready to chase down everything, swordsmanship, magic, and more. Back at home, Chris explained to himself that he finally hit 1 star in dark magic. But because of leftover junk from his body's previous life, it took longer than expected. Managing light and dark at the same time wasn't easy, and he'd need more power before he could fully control both. Later, he rang a bell and a maid appeared. Though she wasn't just any maid, it was Mary, a powerful spirit. Apparently, his past self caused so much chaos that now they had to assign a supernatural maid to him. He didn't like the idea and planned to replace her eventually. He just asked for some juice before heading out to train, and she offered to mix it with blood like usual. Chris wasn't having it. He asked for something simple, like strawberries. She didn't get why he'd want something so boring, but after a bit of back and forth, she agreed. Soon after, as Chris left for training early in the morning, Cox showed up, cheering him on. He was proud to see Chris working so hard and felt like his trust was finally paying off. But Chris didn't like the praise. He shut it down quickly, giving off a cold vibe and making it clear he never asked anyone to believe in him, and no one had the right to decide that for him anyway. Cox, caught off guard by Chris's reaction, quickly apologizes and backs off, wishing him a good session before walking away. Chris watches him leave, feeling like there's definitely something weird about the guy. At the training grounds, Chris notices the vibe has changed. The other trainees don't seem as tense or hostile anymore. Their eyes are calmer, more relaxed. He figures now's a good time to slowly get on their good side. Meanwhile, someone from the group, this bird-looking dude, quietly observes Chris training, then heads off toward a nearby tent to give Melon the heads up that Chris is back again. Melon, hearing this, starts wondering what Chris is really up to. That duel from before is still stuck in her head. Thorn had solid technique, but Chris somehow managed to shut down his dark energy at just the right moment. She wonders if he could actually read the flow of a fight. If that's true, then maybe, just maybe, he's got the kind of talent that could surpass even someone like Esha de Baron, the main family's top dog. But she quickly brushes off the thought. After all, Chris used to be a total mess, and there's no way he can make up for all that wasted potential. Suddenly, a ruckus breaks out outside. Melon heads out to check it and hears from one of the guys that Chris apparently got into it with a squire. The others are buzzing, confused how Chris even held his own, especially since the guy he clashed with, Cannon, is a 1-star fighter. They start guessing maybe Chris hit that rank too. Chris, as bold as ever, starts calling out the knights, mocking their reputation. He challenges anyone else to step up if they're not cowards. That ticks people off, and eventually, a knight named Torin steps forward. Chris smirks, knowing they walked right into his trap. As the fight begins, Chris encourages Torin to come at him, and when Torin charges in, Chris begins studying his movements closely. He watches the way Torin swings, how he moves his feet, and quickly realizes this must be that unique swamp-style swordplay he's heard whispers about. So he starts copying it mid-fight. Before long, he lands a clean hit to Torin's face, knocking him to the ground and sending his weapon flying. Melon, watching, is clearly shocked. Chris, on the other hand, is thrilled he managed to replicate the technique on the spot. With Torin laid out flat, Chris sits on top of him, looking more amused than anything. Everyone around them is stunned. They can't believe how Chris managed to get this strong when his core had supposedly been ruined. Melon, seeing all this, realizes her instincts might have been right after all. Chris stands up and keeps trash-talking, saying he expected better from the knights. He even blames Melon for their weak performance. The others whisper nervously, unsure if he's gone too far insulting someone like her. Melon stays calm but lets him know he's getting out of line. She picks up a sword and swings hard. Not at him, but close enough to crack the ground right beside him, sending dust flying everywhere. Then she lets out a wave of deep purple energy and warns that it would only take her a second to shut him down completely. Chris challenges Melon, setting some ground rules for their fight. Nothing too crazy, just using basic dark energy and simple wooden weapons. Melon switches to a wooden sword without complaint, confident that she can still beat him even if she only uses a fraction of her power. Chris raises the stakes, saying he's willing to bet his legs on the fight. Melon, not backing down, says he won't be walking out of there anyway. As they start sparring, Melon immediately takes the offensive. Her hits are powerful, forcing Chris to stay sharp just to block and deflect. The trainees watching are surprised he's still standing. They figure Melon's not using her usual weapons, so maybe that's why he's keeping up. Even Melon starts to feel frustrated. No matter how hard she swings, her strikes just aren't landing like she expected. She remembers the same thing happened when Chris fought the others. He always seems to slip past when it counts. Meanwhile, Chris keeps cool under pressure, dodging and defending as she gets more aggressive. Then Melon starts charging her sword with energy, preparing a heavy swing that might push past the rules they agreed on. She brings it down hard, but Chris sidesteps quickly and rushes in. Out of nowhere, he headbutts her right in the face, catching her completely off guard. She stumbles back, shocked to see blood on her hand. Chris explains to himself that since Melon uses spells along with her sword, once her magic is held back, her physical defense isn't strong enough to deal with fast, dirty moves like that. It was a risky gamble, but it worked. He also adds that if he'd used poison on his nails during that move, she wouldn't be standing right now. Just a little warning to show he had the upper hand. Melon, now laughing, admits she underestimated him and says she'll be more serious next time. But Chris points to a scratch on her neck, making it clear that the fight is already over. She accepts her defeat and asks what he wants in return. Chris then pushes things further, stepping close and asking if she'd kneel to him one day. That request takes her by surprise. She explains that her loyalty lies with the main family of the clan, and kneeling to him isn't something she can just do. But Chris has something bold in mind. He says all of that would change if he became one of the clan's next leaders. She says it's nonsense, pointing out that only the direct bloodline has ever been given that title. Chris responds that there's no rule saying someone from a branch family can't aim for it. He then agrees to her request for a rematch, saying they'll fight again in a month, but next time, no limits. Melon accepts, saying he won't beat her again, but Chris just leaves it hanging, hinting that anything's possible. With the fight over, Chris heads back and hands a letter of recommendation to his father, saying the knights need better training. Then, we see a short flashback of Melon speaking to his father. She praises Chris, calling him a genius, someone who beats skilled fighters, even her. Despite being lower ranked, Chris's father seems unsure, still having a hard time fully trusting him, but it's becoming clear that his son is starting to prove himself in real ways. Chris gets what he came for, a key to the library, something he's been aiming at for a while. As he walks away, he feels like he's making real progress. Not only did he get the key, but he also started changing Melon's opinion of him. She's no ordinary soldier either. Back during the darkest times in history, she was a top-tier fighter with 6 stars under her belt. If Chris plans to rise to the top of the Dark Magic clan, having someone like her on his side is a must. He knows she hasn't fully sided with him yet, but he's confident that with some time, he can win her over. After all, he thinks of himself as a genius, and thinking back to the look his father gave him earlier, he's starting to see something that might actually be pride. Maybe his father's growing fond of him. It's a weird feeling for Chris, who's never really had a proper dad in his past life, but this time, maybe things will be different. He quietly accepts Count Khazar as his father and promises to live up to that role. Inside the library, he sees all sorts of forbidden books. Magic involving blood, curses, even summoning. These aren't the kind of things that would ever be allowed under the rules of light. As he grabs one, suddenly someone appears right behind him. It's Mary, wearing that creepy smile. He nearly jumps out of his skin. Turns out she used to be the librarian here, and she jokes about him coming just to see her. She gets all playful, floating books around, but he shuts her down quickly. Later, Mary points out that the book he picked holds a 4-star technique far above his current level. But Chris isn't bothered. He insists he can handle it because he believes he's special. Mary humors him, giving fake compliments, but he can tell she doesn't mean it and tells her to knock it off. She asks why he picked that book, and he says he's got a plan. It's time to sniff out the traitor. Soon, we see Chris watching the others during training. He's narrowed it down to a few suspects. First is Thorn, who clearly hates him and never misses a chance to throw shade. The second is Cox, who doesn't come from the main family but still has special access to the punishment cave. That's pretty suspicious, especially since he acts overly friendly. Chris even considers that maybe there's someone else behind it all, someone hiding in the shadows. Whoever it is, they clearly want him to crash and burn. They gave him the Dreamstone and the cave on purpose, so he decides to act exactly how they expect him to, as the same selfish jerk they think he is. That way, whoever seems happy about it will give themselves away. He suddenly storms out of training, complaining that it's way too hard and he's had enough. The others are left confused. Then later, he causes a scene during dinner, smashing a plate and blaming the servant for not giving him proper food. His father shows up, looking disappointed. Just when he thought Chris had changed, he now believes it was all just an act. He walks away, shaking his head. But Chris, he's watching closely. This is all part of his test. Chris felt a little guilty for putting on an act, but he told himself it was all for the family's future. So he went all in, spreading gossip that he was back to his old messed up ways. He made a show of yelling at the maids, tossing coins around like they meant nothing, and doing anything that screamed, "Spoiled brat!" At one point, he was lounging with a fancy drink in hand and pretending to enjoy himself. Mary was there too, keeping a close eye on him. He asked why the drink tasted weird, and she casually mentioned it had no alcohol since he was still underage. He joked that it didn't matter, since everyone already saw him as a lost cause anyway. Mary said she didn't care. Whether he was good or bad, she'd stick with him. But Chris reminded her that it was all a trap. He was just putting on a show to catch someone hiding in plain sight. Right in front of her, a strange spell lit up in the air. Mary was shocked that he'd already gotten the hang of such a tough magic, but Chris brushed it off, saying he just tweaked it a bit so he could use it even without a high-level dark core. He let her believe he was just being his usual, clever self. Suddenly, Thorn barged in, clearly upset. Chris quickly pretended to be tipsy and slurred a bit, trying to stay in character. Thorn was clearly disappointed, thinking Chris had actually improved only to fall back into old habits. But that strong emotional reaction, that told Chris Thorn wasn't the traitor. If anything, he looked genuinely let down. Chris pulled him aside and said there might be someone in the household pulling strings behind the scene. He explained that he was putting on this entire show to smoke out the real problem, pretending to be exactly what the enemy wanted to see. Thorne was skeptical, but when he sniffed the drink and realized it was harmless, he started believing it. Chris told him to be patient. The traitor would show their hand soon. Later, while still playing the part, Chris threw a tantrum and dumped a drink right in front of Cox. He accused him of bringing the wrong wine and started ranting like a spoiled noble. Cox, keeping his calm, offered to send someone to get the right one, but Chris insisted he go himself. Cox hesitated, clearly annoyed, but eventually gave in and walked off. Once alone, Chris sifted through the papers Cox had been working on. He thought he'd find evidence, maybe weird numbers or secret letters, but what he saw didn't scream guilty. Still, he wasn't ready to rule Cox out just yet. When Cox returned, soaked but composed, he handed over the wine and pretended like nothing happened. Chris played along, joking that Cox was his favorite just to keep the tension low. Cox stayed polite, then passed along a message. Some of Chris's friends wanted to meet him privately, like they used to. Chris raised a brow at that. Cox warned him it might not be a great idea, but also said it wasn't his place to interfere. That last bit stuck with Chris. Something about it felt off. Maybe the real game was just beginning. Chris agreed to go meet the group, and Cox, trying to hide his satisfaction, told him to do whatever he wanted. Things were falling into place better than Chris had hoped. Later, Chris was at a table piled high with food, surrounded by so-called friends who were already throwing shady comments. One of them made a smug remark about how Chris might be acting different lately, but there's no way he could be the top guy now. Chris glanced around, noticing a young girl being made to pour drinks. Something about it just screamed sketchy. Someone pushed a drink his way, and as soon as Chris lifted it, he sensed something was off. Instead of drinking it, he hurled it right into the guy's face. The dude started coughing and freaking out, which just confirmed Chris's suspicion there was something bad in the drink. Without hesitating, Chris turned and put his hand to the girl's head, casting a spell. She dropped unconscious in an instant. The others gasped, shocked that he could even use dark magic. But Chris wasn't in the mood to explain himself. In a flash, he grabbed two of the guys by the heads and smashed them into the table, again and again without holding back. One of them tried to beg for mercy, asking why this was happening. But Chris said that if they didn't even understand what they did wrong by now, they didn't deserve mercy. He pulled out a knife, making it clear he wasn't messing around. Later, the two guys were tied up. One of them had even wet himself out of fear. They admitted they were just trying to set Chris up. Their job was to drug him and make it look like he had murdered the girl afterward. They claimed they were forced to do it because someone was blackmailing them over their shady dealings. Chris demanded to know who was really behind it all. When they hesitated, he moved the knife a little too close for comfort. That was enough. They shouted out the name, Cox. They swore they'd do anything to be spared. Chris acted like he was considering it. Then, he hit them with another spell, one that glowed and flew right into their foreheads. He told them to follow his instructions to the letter. A moment later, they both collapsed, knocked out cold. One of them even had foam at the mouth. Soon after, Cox rushed into Chris's father's office, putting on a show. He claimed Chris had gotten drunk and murdered someone, then dumped the body. He said this time, it wasn't something they could cover up. Chris's father didn't waste time. He called for an emergency court session and told Cox to bring Chris in immediately. Cox left with a grin, thinking everything was going perfectly. At the trial, Chris stood in front of everyone, calm and collected. He claimed he was innocent, but his father wasn't convinced, saying there were witnesses. Chris didn't argue. He just looked toward the doors. That's when the supposedly dead girl walked into the room, very much alive. Everyone looked stunned, especially the two guys who'd helped set up the trap. The girl explained that Chris had taken care of her after she passed out. He even gave her money to help with her rent. She pointed fingers at the two fake friends, saying they were the ones who tried to poison Chris. Chris's father looked confused, demanding to know what was going on. But Chris had already decided it was time to end this game. He started preparing his magic, ready to reveal everything. One of the guys admitted they had lied and that everything they said was on orders from the butler Cox. The other guy backed it up, saying Cox made them do it to get Chris into trouble. Cox immediately lost it, yelling that it was all lies and that Chris had planned this with his friends just to pin it on him. He tried to act like the victim and said Chris had gone too far with this little game. But Chris had already expected this kind of reaction. Calmly, he asked his father if he could be allowed to question Cox himself. His father was a bit confused at first, but agreed, telling Chris to go ahead, but warned that if he stepped out of line, he'd shut it down right away. Chris promised to keep it clean. Then, with full confidence, he stood tall and said that as someone who carried the authority of their magic empire, representing both his family and the powerful leaders backing him, he was going to get the truth. He looked straight at Cox and asked if he'd promised to tell only the truth. Cox, not realizing what was about to happen, said yes. Chris asked again, now invoking his imperial authority, and Cox agreed a second time. That's when the spell kicked in. A glowing mark appeared on Cox's forehead, and he suddenly clutched his head in pain. People watching realized it was a high-level spell, something that shouldn't even be possible for someone like Chris to use. Chris explained that he had tweaked it to work at a lower level, but it had a catch. The person had to make 2 oaths, and Cox just walked right into it. Cox demanded to know what Chris had done, and Chris said he'd just forced him to speak the truth. He asked again why Cox ordered people to frame him. Under the spell's power, Cox couldn't hold back. He cried out and admitted that someone had found out about his shady dealings and blackmailed him into targeting Chris. He confessed that he'd been sabotaging Chris since he was a kid. Chris called out the corruption, specifically how Cox had been stealing money over time. He demanded to know who gave the order. Cox hesitated, but Chris tightened the spell and forced it out of him. It was a powerful figure, Suresh de Baron, the second son of the main family. Cox panicked, realizing what he'd just said, and shouted that he had to escape before Suresh came for him. But Chris didn't give him that chance. He grabbed a sword from a nearby guard and without waiting, ended Cox's life right there. Everyone was stunned, especially his father. Chris explained that he had no other option. If Cox stayed alive, the main family would have buried the truth and made Cox disappear like nothing happened. This way, the truth was out, and now people would know that Suresh was behind it all. His father looked serious, then silently opened a hidden portal behind him. He told Chris to follow and walked into a secret space away from the court. It was a hidden training ground, away from prying eyes. There, his father spoke more honestly. He asked if Chris really believed that Suresh would become more dangerous because of the fight over who would inherit the family's power. He admitted that Chris made the right call, even if it felt rushed. With how things had turned out, there was no going back. He said the family would now have to back the first daughter instead, since the oldest son had completely lost it and couldn't be trusted with anything. Chris brought up a bold idea. He could become the next heir. His dad immediately brushed it off, saying that kind of thing doesn't usually happen. But Chris pointed out that people from branch families can be picked, as long as they're skilled enough. Otherwise, why would someone like Esha be trying so hard to ruin him? His father admitted that Chris used to be more promising than Esha as a kid, but lately he'd fallen behind. Chris said he'd catch up quickly, he just needed a little help. He asked his dad to use his influence to get him into a big event happening in 2 months. It was a major test for rising talents in their world. His dad reminded him that the event had a requirement. You had to be a 2-star to even join, and Chris had just reached 1 star. Chris didn't seem worried though. He promised to level up before then and gave his dad a grin like he already had it all figured out. Some time passed and the staff around the estate started whispering. They noticed Chris was really taking things seriously. They heard rumors that the Count himself was training him, something even high-ranking knights had struggled with before. Some wondered how long Chris would last. Meanwhile, out in the field, Chris was slicing through tough materials with precision. He asked if he was using the right combo of sword techniques, and his father was surprised at how fast he picked it up. This was his first day learning it. Chris, being curious, questioned why he had to keep using the styles separately. He thought combining them would be better. Then, as a new monster appeared, he dashed forward and cut through it with a move that wasn't even meant for slicing. He explained how he combined one style with another type of energy to make it work. His dad kept a straight face, but inside he was shocked. Chris wasn't supposed to be able to do that at his level. And then Chris casually showed that even while using those advanced techniques, he could still cast spells without trouble. This time, his dad couldn't hold in his reaction. He was completely stunned. Fast forward a couple weeks. Chris was lying on the ground, worn out from training. He knew that stamina was a big part of getting stronger, so he couldn't slack off, even if it was exhausting. Then one of his rivals, Melon, showed up. She teased him a bit, reminding him their duel was coming soon and saying she was excited for it. Chris knew she was way ahead of him. She was an upper 4-star and he was still at the bottom of 1-star. On top of that, each level had different tiers, lower, middle, and upper. He was barely getting started. Still, being from a wealthy family gave him access to resources that helped him train faster. Later, back at his room, he asked his attendant Mary if everything was ready for the trip. She said she packed everything and even dressed up nicely for the occasion. He reminded her that he never actually invited her, but she didn't seem to care. She was happy to tag along. He asked how someone like her could even get overheated, considering she wasn't human. That reminded him of a previous conversation with his father, where he tried to switch to a human assistant. His dad told him it wasn't possible, since he'd formed a binding contract with Mary. A high-level banshee like her couldn't be managed without one. Chris, frustrated, asked if there was a way to break it. His father only smirked and hinted that the only way out involved something awkward and a little too personal, like sharing a serious kiss with Mary. Chris really started to question all of his life choices after that. Chris couldn't wrap his head around why Christian messed things up in the first place. He told Mary that she couldn't tag along this time since he was headed somewhere crowded. She looked completely heartbroken, saying she hadn't stepped out in years. Chris wasn't ready for those sad puppy eyes and, without much resistance, gave in, though he told her to stay hidden from others to avoid problems. She instantly perked up like a kid being told they're getting ice cream. When she asked where they were going, he mentioned it was a place where he could gain something useful. She guessed he was going to grab more land or chase cash, but he said no to both. As they reached the carriage, another guy, Thorn, was already waiting and grumbling about Chris being late. Thorn claimed he was there to keep Chris in check in case he caused another mess. Chris waved him off, saying he wasn't doing anything wild, just heading to do something that's been in their bloodline for generations. Thorn decided to stick with him, probably more worried about him causing embarrassment than anything else. Chris joked about Thorn being too innocent for this kind of place, and Thorn got annoyed, saying he could handle it just fine. Eventually, they pulled up to a massive building that looked more like a palace than a business spot. Even Mary, who'd seen some strange stuff in her time, was starstruck. Thorn had no idea buildings like that even existed. Chris handed Thorn a mask and told him to act natural, while reminding Mary to stay invisible for safety. Chris whispered something to Mary, probably some task, and she vanished, leaving Thorn confused. Chris didn't bother explaining and dragged him inside. As they walked past rows of tables, a bunch of regulars turned to look. Some folks were murmuring, surprised to see two young guys walking in so confidently. Chris challenged Thorn to a 1-hour competition. Who could earn more in that time? The loser had to use a ridiculous title for the winner. Thorn hesitated for a second but took the bet, snatching some coins to get started. Before long, Chris had already pulled a win at one of the tables. The folks watching complimented him on his skills. Chris knew the game though. He explained to himself that these places often let newbies win a bit to get them overconfident. That way, when they go all in, the house takes everything. Thorn, of course, didn't know any of that. He got drawn into a losing streak while thinking he was in control. Chris kept track of how much they both lost. He was barely down, while Thorn was sinking fast. The people around were starting to joke about Thorn being easy pickings, and Chris knew it wouldn't be long before some scammers tried to bait him. Chris didn't stop him though. In fact, he wanted Thorn to become the perfect trap, someone others would target, giving Chris a chance to catch the real cheaters. Sure enough, as Thorn got more frustrated at the table, Chris noticed people peeking at his cards and using sneaky tricks. He smiled to himself. Everything was going just as he planned. Mary popped up behind Chris, saying she tracked down the people he was looking for. He gave her a quick nod, clearly impressed, while Thorn stood nearby, a little flustered and acting all awkward. Like he didn't know whether to be scared or impressed by her. A short while later, they reached their destination. Mary pointed to a room and said this was the spot. Chris told her to open it, and once they stepped inside, the people already in the room got visibly shaken. They had no clue who just barged in and were clearly panicking. Chris casually took off his mask and introduced himself like he expected everyone to already know him. The people inside started demanding to know why he was there. Chris just told them to bring their boss over. That's when a guy suddenly changed his attitude completely, acting super polite and fake nice. This was Grantville, head of a well-known merchant group. But that wasn't all. He also secretly owned the casino they'd just come from. Chris said he wanted a private talk. Grantville tried to play innocent, wondering what the issue was. Chris explained that someone at the casino had tricked his younger brother, who he claimed to care a lot about. Grantville still played dumb and asked if that guy in the tiger mask was really his brother. Chris then revealed Thorn's identity as the Count's heir, which wiped the smug look off Grantville's face. The guy panicked hard and started backpedaling immediately. He swore that he had no idea who Thorn was and that the shady stuff going on at the casino wasn't his responsibility. Then Mary, with her usual creepy flair, stepped in and gave him a death stare that could make anyone regret their life choices. Grantville immediately cracked under pressure, begging for forgiveness. He promised to make up for it, asking how much money would be enough. Chris threw out a huge number, 8 million rupees, which made Grantville's jaw drop. He clearly didn't have that kind of cash lying around. Chris then said he'd settle for 200,000 instead. Grantville quickly agreed, glad it wasn't worse. But Chris wasn't done yet. He mentioned there was something else he needed from him too. Later, Chris was checking out some new gear. Mary looked at the shiny equipment and said she didn't expect him to use all that money on weapons. She called it super clever, which was kind of her thing, adding super to everything she said. Chris, on the other hand, was clearly loving the attention and the loot. Mary took a closer look at the sword and said it felt weird. Turns out, it was an old legendary blade called Grenade, a weapon once tied to a fallen hero. Many wanted it for its history, but now it looked worn out and rusty. Even so, Chris didn't seem to mind. He just smirked, knowing full well that things aren't always what they appear to be. Chris told Mary not to worry. It was all part of the bigger picture. He handed her a necklace, the one he saw her eyeing before. He told her to just take it as a small gift. She looked really shocked. He figured that if she didn't get this one thing, she'd keep carrying some kind of regret, so he hoped this would help her feel at peace and move forward. She was clearly touched. She said it was the first time she'd ever been given a present, alive or dead. Chris got flustered but brushed it off, saying they should head home. She gave him this incredibly warm smile and promised to give it her all from now on. As a thank you, she said she'd start making him a better version of her usual drink, something even tastier. While walking home, he mumbled that he didn't really want to drink whatever creepy stuff she had in mind. They kept playfully arguing. She teased that the strawberry juice he liked so much was actually made from blood. He told her to cut it out and stop being weird. Then he suddenly paused. He felt like he forgot something important. Turns out he totally left Thorn behind at the casino. Next morning, loud yelling snapped him out of sleep. Thorn had stormed in, furious, yelling Chris's name. Chris sat up groggy and confused, only to be reminded of the mess he left behind. Thorn said he almost got sold off to pay debts and only got saved because someone happened to recognize him. Chris said sorry, but figured Grantville probably sorted things out. But then, he reminded Thorn about their bet. Since he lost, he had to keep his word. Thorn looked like he'd rather eat dirt, but slowly started to say the title Chris demanded. He muttered the words with so much pain, then shouted the ridiculous title like it physically hurt. Chris grinned and told him to keep working hard and show proper respect. Thorn, of course, swore he'd get revenge someday. Chris laughed, joking about how this angry little guy might grow up and take him down someday. But then his thoughts shifted to someone else, Esed. This kid was part of a powerful clan and held the top spot among the younger generation. Chris didn't have any emotional ties to him, but if he wanted to rise through the ranks and become a real leader, a clash with Esed was unavoidable. He swore to settle the score personally one day. But first he needed support, especially from someone like Melon. As he knelt with the holy sword beside him, he looked down at it thoughtfully. The blade, called Grenade, was once sought after by many, but over time it was tossed aside like some relic, mostly because no one could properly wield it. Chris wondered if it would react differently to him. He reached out and grabbed its handle, but in a flash the blade shot out a surge of sacred energy, throwing his hand back. He looked down at his hand, burned slightly from the blast, and sighed. Honestly, this wasn't unexpected. It only confirmed how serious this power really was. Chris was in the middle of some serious sword training. He kept smashing different hammers onto this mysterious weapon, which sparked back with energy every time. Slowly, the hammers were breaking one by one, but Chris didn't stop. He just kept going like he was trying to force it into submission. Later, at a hidden training area, his dad checked in on him, asking if he was ready. Chris nodded. There was a woman standing nearby. At first, he didn't recognize her, but then it hit him. She was his aunt, someone he hadn't seen in ages. She wasn't just family, though. She was a big deal in their clan, handling secret stuff and guarding the top elders. Basically, she was the kind of person you don't mess with. Chris was surprised she had shown up. His dad said it was about some guy named Cox and that she found the whole situation a bit amusing. Chris figured it might be because the clan elders were stepping in over something silly, which could be both good and bad news. Maybe it was a chance to get on their good side. His aunt wasn't convinced, though. She thought he was being reckless, especially since he was planning to fight someone way out of his league. She even told him to back out of the match. But Chris wasn't the type to back down. He had something up his sleeve, a special sword. When he showed it to her, she freaked out a bit. That sword wasn't normal. It was sacred and known to be untamable. Even the top elder had failed to control it. She warned him that trying to use it could literally destroy him. But Chris just calmly handed it over. The moment she touched it, the sword zapped her and she quickly dropped it. Shocked, she asked how he was managing to hold it without being harmed. Chris just grinned and told her it was his secret. One thing was clear. He was the only one able to use that sword. His dad was clearly impressed, while somewhere nearby, the opponent he was going to fight, someone powerful, watched with amusement. She didn't care about the sword and was confident that Chris wouldn't survive the day anyway. Then the match began. Chris's opponent came flying in, attacking with crazy speed and strength. He blocked it, but even he admitted she was on a whole different level. Still, something strange happened. Each time their weapons clashed, the sacred sword he held started to push back against her dark energy. His dad and aunt were shocked. Not only was Chris holding his ground, but it looked like the sword was fighting alongside him. They noticed his hand was glowing with a strange light, a mix of the sword's power and his own energy. It wasn't just brute force. Chris was doing something no one else had ever managed, and that might just be his key to winning. Chris launched a strong counterattack, and his opponent had to block it quickly. His father noticed how powerful the strike was, but also saw that Chris's dark energy was acting a bit unstable. His aunt, however, figured out what was really going on. Chris wasn't losing control. He was actually guiding his dark energy just right for a moment so that the sacred weapon wouldn't push back against him. His opponent stepped back, keeping some distance. Chris was clearly enjoying the fight and staying sharp. She started to suspect that he might be reading her actions before she even moved. Turns out, he had been paying close attention to how she fought. He could tell what move was coming just by watching the way her body prepared to strike. Even the best fighters follow certain patterns, and he was picking up on them. But she wasn't done yet. She released a strange energy from her hand, one that wrapped around Chris like a trap. She reminded him of a key detail. Her group doesn't just fight with swords, they also use magic. Chris was almost caught off guard, but a blast of energy from his side blew the spell away. He had been carrying a hidden item that protected him from stuff like that, one he definitely wasn't supposed to have. He casually admitted that he borrowed it from a hidden stash. Chris then pulled out something else and tossed it at his opponent. It exploded on impact. She dodged, but he threw another, this time more accurate. It also burst apart with power. Turns out he had bought those tricky tools using some stolen money. They worked better than expected. He knew she was still standing and dared her to come out. She dashed toward him, aiming for a powerful stab. Chris reacted instantly, redirecting her weapon with precision. Their blades met and the force of the impact shattered hers. Watching from the side, his dad finally understood why Chris had thrown that strange object earlier. It had weakened her gear. He couldn't help but smile, proud of his son's clever thinking. His opponent stepped forward, laughing like she was enjoying every second of this. Even though she lost her weapon, she wasn't mad. If anything, she seemed excited. Chris stayed calm, moved with minimal effort, and dodged her next strike with almost no movement. He quickly stepped behind her and placed his blade near her neck, ending the duel in one smooth motion. His dad was beaming with pride again. Chris asked if the fight was good enough. Just a little scratch on her face, proving how close the blade had gotten. She laughed, saying she couldn't calm down now, and Chris reminded her about the offer he made before the fight. He said he wouldn't force her into anything, as loyalty can't be demanded. She asked if he'd still be willing to fight her again in the future, and Chris said he'd do it as many times as she wanted. Later, his aunt was watching the sunset, reflecting on how rare it was to see someone like Chris control such powerful energy with ease. Somewhere else, a man tried to pick up the sacred weapon and dropped it right away, saying it was nearly impossible to handle. He explained that controlling dark energy perfectly during battle wasn't realistic. It would take someone either not human or completely insane to keep that kind of control. His aunt thought of Chris's confident grin and started to smile a little. Maybe, just maybe, the old dreams of their family had a chance now. Afterward, in a totally different mood, we find ourselves in a kitchen. A guy who looked like he belonged in a horror movie was calmly making desserts, slicing fruit and decorating cakes like a pro. Chris was surprised this scary-looking guy was behind the sweets. Another girl nearby confirmed that, appearances aside, his baking was top tier. Chris was there to make cookies, planning to give them to someone. The girl teased him about whether they were for a special someone. Chris tried to deny it but admitted they were technically for a girl. One of the kitchen helpers offered to do it for him, but Chris said he wanted to do it himself. It felt more meaningful that way. Before he could finish explaining, something red splattered on his cheek. In the background, a group of rowdy kitchen workers were going wild, smashing strawberries, turning the place into a battlefield of jam. Chris joked around in the kitchen, wondering if they were mixing something sketchy into the strawberry drink, making everyone laugh. Later that night, he spotted Marion about to leave on horseback. He stopped her, wanting to say goodbye properly since he heard she was heading out. Even though she figured he'd be worn out after the intense fight the day before, he seemed totally fine and even had a surprise ready for her. She was caught off guard when he handed her a box full of cookies, and her face turned red from the gesture. He said it was just his way of showing how glad he was to see her again. It flashed back to when Chris had been asking around about what kind of treats Marion liked. One of his friends had teased him for trying to impress her that hard. Back in the present, Marion took a bite of the cookies and was stunned by how good they tasted. She was impressed and asked if he made them himself. Chris told her he did, which made her feel like she needed to return the favor somehow. She asked if there was anything he wanted in exchange. Chris gave a serious answer. He said he wanted a real connection with her, not just a distant family tie. Marion quickly picked up on the deeper meaning, assuming he was asking for her support in the ongoing power struggle within their clan. She explained that she couldn't help directly since she had to remain neutral by family rules. Chris claimed it was just an honest wish to grow closer, though he joked that if she did help in secret, he wouldn't complain. She chuckled, saying that he was bold but not in a bad way, and with cookies that good, of course she'd grow fond of him. She asked for more next time, and one of their elders nearby was getting emotional just watching the warm moment. Chris joked that if she upset him, he might not be able to recreate that flavor again. Marion looked happy and, as a change of subject, asked him if he'd ever considered joining her order of elite knights. He was about to explain his thoughts when she cut him off, saying his performance in the duel had proved his skill. She warned him, though, his rivals in the leadership challenge wouldn't be easy to beat, and she didn't want him to fall short before reaching his full potential. Chris wasn't shaken. He said that if he failed to rise to the top this way, then he didn't mind risking everything. Marianne respected his conviction and admitted she believed in him, but she gave one last warning. He should be cautious around the first young lady. Others might see her as sweet, but she had her own layers, and he'd soon learn why. Marion rode off, and later that night Chris lay in bed thinking about how powerful his relatives were, even though they didn't get much recognition during the last big war. It made him wonder just how many hidden monsters the Magic Empire had, and how much stronger he'd need to get to avoid repeating the mistakes of history. Then, a month passed. Chris met up with his father, who had summoned him late at night. The moment he walked in, his dad immediately noticed something. Chris had already reached a major milestone in his power, faster than expected. His dad was shocked, but Chris brushed it off, saying it was just part of the promise he'd made. That's when his father delivered some news. Even though both Chris and another candidate had been put forward for an upcoming sacred ritual, only the other guy got approved. The clan had rejected Chris because of his past behavior, overspending, getting into trouble, and other wild stuff. And since the claims were true, there wasn't much he could argue. His dad was clearly frustrated about how they dismissed Chris' potential, but said it wasn't the clan leader who made the final call. It was a higher-up named Lohan. This person was also a strong candidate for the ritual, which involved absorbing dark energy from a dangerous source. Only the top performers would get the most power, and if someone like Lohan took it all, Chris's chances would shrink big time. Still, Chris said he'd handle things on his own. His dad offered to help, even mentioning that he'd ask Marion for support if needed, but Chris politely refused. He wanted to do this his own way. When he asked if any rivals from another noble family would be there, his dad mentioned a particularly arrogant young man who had already spoken badly about Chris, saying he only knew how to control monsters. Chris, instead of getting mad, joked about how soft his dad could be. Then he said he'd prove himself and planned to join the next monster hunt hosted by that family, using it as a way to make his name known. At the same time, in a grand hall somewhere else, Marianne reported back to a high-ranking elder that she had personally checked on Chris. The elder was skeptical, saying he remembered the boy as a loudmouth who thought too highly of himself. Marianne said he'd changed, but she wasn't sure yet if he could fulfill the elder's long-standing goal. This wish the elder had held onto was so strong that he had used forbidden magic to extend his life. He laughed at the idea of Chris being the one to make it happen, but admitted it was intriguing. Even so, he said he wouldn't step in to help Chris with the ritual approval problem. If Chris really wanted the power, he'd have to earn it himself. That was the kind of warrior the elder respected. Marion pushed gently, saying Chris was still young and deserved a fair shot to prove himself. The elder snapped at her for crossing the line and reminded her how he treated people he expected great things from. He accused her of caring too much about Chris, then summoned his top enforcer, a shadowy figure named Simon. Simon appeared instantly, having already listened to the entire conversation. The elder told him to keep an eye on Chris's actions leading up to the ritual. Simon agreed, but asked if he could play a harmless trick on Chris while watching him. The elder didn't seem to mind. Marion was caught off guard by what was said, and the elder gave her a sharp look, warning her not to get too carried away. Meanwhile, Simon, their creepy enforcer, chuckled darkly as he left, clearly already scheming something. Marion quietly hoped that Chris would come out of all this okay. Later, a carriage rolled into a quiet village. Inside, Chris was thinking about how fast he'd leveled up to 2 stars thanks to his natural skill. But even with all that training, his energy reserves weren't strong enough to push to the next level. He needed something powerful and fast to boost his strength. That's where the black pill hunt came in. It was hosted by a group he'd recently clashed with, so this situation was weirdly working in his favor. However, getting the black pill wasn't as easy as just capturing a wild beast. There were extra requirements he had to meet. As the carriage pulled up, someone from the village rushed over to greet Chris with a smile and a gift. But Chris, who clearly wasn't in the mood for niceties, knocked the offering to the ground and accused the guy of getting involved in shady business lately. A funny little memory popped up showing Chris messing with him, like how a cartoon penguin might get bullied. Still, Chris decided to let it go, for now, but he gave him a warning to clean up his act. Then, shifting focus, he asked the guy to find him a rare type of pill, which had recently gotten expensive. When the guy hesitated, Chris signaled to Mary, and she just laughed. Whatever she did scared the poor man so much he dropped to the ground and promised to get what was needed immediately. Chris also casually added that he wanted a weapon sharp enough to pierce armor, and then left him panicking. As they rode off, Mary asked if they were finally heading back. Chris said not yet, he had one more stop. They pulled up in front of a small, shady-looking shop, and Chris walked in and started pointing at items, saying he wanted to buy a bunch. Mary got curious and asked why he was grabbing so many weird things, especially when she spotted something questionable. She misread the situation and thought Chris had other intentions. He quickly got flustered, waving his hands and saying it wasn't what she thought. She tried to act cool but was clearly jumping to conclusions. Eventually, he explained that the items were for someone else, an older person who needed a bit of help with their energy. The shopkeeper figured it out too and agreed to keep the whole thing under wraps. Not long after, Chris met with someone he knew well. The two exchanged a few words, mostly about the upcoming hunt. The other guy clearly cared, but didn't know how to express it, brushing it off as wanting a fair fight. Their father overheard something embarrassing from earlier and asked about it, but the guy clammed up, too embarrassed to explain. Later on, we shift scenes again, this time to a noble family's estate. At the gate, a small but feisty guard stepped up, saying loud and clear that Chris was banned from entering. Chris's allies weren't having it and stepped in to defend him, shocked that someone so low-ranked was talking back without realizing who they were messing with. The small guard at the mansion gate let them know that he had orders from above. Chris wasn't allowed in, and he wasn't going to go out of his way to help someone he didn't respect. Chris figured that meant he'd have to find a place to stay on his own. One of his friends got heated and threatened to deal with the guard himself, but Chris calmed him down and instead asked about how much they'd have to pay for accommodation. The guard panicked and quickly said they could just charge everything to Count Iron Man. That worked out well. Next thing you know, Chris and his group were chilling in a rented mansion, one that looked like it belonged to a noble. The staff there were wondering how much it cost, probably a massive amount. But Chris didn't care. It wasn't his money, so he told them to take their time settling in and they'd go relax afterward. While they were unpacking, Chris heard something rustling in the luggage. Turns out Mary had stowed away and jumped out, saying she couldn't bear to be left behind. She looked completely at home and insisted she was there to serve him. Chris was confused and a bit annoyed, but she just teased him like always. Suddenly, they were interrupted by a furious voice yelling about a bill. It was Alois, one of Count Iron Man's sons. Chris explained that since he wasn't given a place to stay, he went out and got one himself. He joked that it was a decent price to teach someone some respect. Alois didn't take it well. He got angry and summoned a beast, a large one, using a special kind of dark magic that forced it to obey by messing with its mind and emotion. Chris knew about this type of spell, but didn't have enough time to master it himself. Even so, he was ready to take on the beast. He asked Mary for a sure. Here's a rewritten version in simple and casual language, changing all the examples and making it feel fresh and original. Chris casually questioned why someone like him shouldn't do what needs to be done. Mary, always by his side, agreed with a big smile. She was happy as long as he stayed away from alcohol. Poor guy wanted a real drink, but she kept blocking him. He didn't complain though. He knew better than to push her. Meanwhile, the small guard from earlier wondered why Alois even wanted them to keep an eye on someone like Chris. Chris noticed them lurking and invited them over, joking that Alois wouldn't be waking up anytime soon after the beating he got. He even offered to keep it quiet if they joined him, but they just told him to stay out of it and went on watching. As night crept in, the two watchers finally gave up, saying it was pointless to keep staring at someone like Chris. As soon as they were out of sight, Chris opened his eyes and sat up, having faked being asleep the whole time. He peeked outside and figured it was late enough to head out. He told Mary he had to go do something and asked her not to follow. But of course, she got suspicious right away. She brought up the item in his pouch and teased him, pretending to think he was going on some kind of romantic mission. He groaned and told her it wasn't like that at all. It was strictly business. That night, he arrived at a hidden spot deep in the mountains, a place with thick, heavy energy. It was one of the secret locations controlled by Count Iron Man, known for its abundance of demon beast energy. Chris was getting close to his target and soon found the hunting grounds. He noticed only a couple of guards at the entrance, not much security, which worked in his favor. Good thing he'd learned a stealth spell from Mary. She suddenly popped up, asking what he was planning with invisibility, and he just shook his head, used to her antics. Moving unseen, he easily slipped past the guards and went further into the area. Eventually, he reached an ancient altar, the place where the final part of the hunt was supposed to happen. The atmosphere was intense, just as he'd heard. A girl with fox-like features appeared and started talking about how to create a black pill. Basically, you had to terrify a beast so much that it chose death over survival. That sheer panic would transform a useless ash pill into a powerful black pill. Turns out the whole event was built around this creepy idea, inflicting fear to unlock power. That's why Count Iron Man's family was in charge of it all. Chris listened quietly, realizing his original plan to learn their technique and use it himself wasn't going to work in time. So, he decided on a different route. He suddenly sensed a strange wave of magic and felt something wasn't right. He turned to trace the source and followed the energy deeper into the forest. Eventually, he came to a hidden cave and pulled up his hood before stepping in. As soon as he entered, a dark, menacing aura surrounded him. He recognized it instantly, a barrier made from high-level dark magic. He suspected it was a breach between the human world and the demon realm. He started to think, what if he lured the beast here instead? He had exactly what he needed to do it, and the idea brought a smile to his face. As he walked off, a bat hanging from the ceiling silently observed him. That bat then transformed. It was Simon all along. He was intrigued by Chris, who had not only beaten Olois but also fooled everyone into thinking he was harmless. Sneaking into such a forbidden area showed guts, and Simon was already plotting something even nastier. Simon strolled up to the edge of the demon world, dipped his hand inside, and let it bleed. His blood spilled onto the ground, and something in the darkness responded, asking what he wished for. Simon was about to bring a demon into the mix. By the next day, the hunt was ready to begin. A flag was stabbed into the ground, marking the start, and there stood Olois with his crew, trying to look all serious and important. Chris was also there, smirking, thinking to himself how bold it was for someone who got smacked down recently to be acting so cool. Chris casually questioned why someone like him shouldn't do what needs to be done. A group was prepping for a monster hunt near an ancient altar. One guy in the group, always loud and overconfident, was talking big, but the others weren't impressed, especially one guy who carried a weapon he didn't even know how to use. Another guy, more chill but sarcastic, pointed out how useless that was and suggested he should step aside if he couldn't handle it. Soon, the leader redirected the group to get in position. Some were told to lower a heavy gate near the altar, while others were assigned guard duty. The laid-back guy was one of them. He didn't argue and went to sit by a tree, already knowing things were going to go sideways. He had brought a couple of secret items with him, something sharp and something powdery, just in case. As the group started tracking the sounds of the monster, the creature finally showed itself. It wasn't the typical scary beast. This one looked weirdly cute, like it belonged in a plushie shop, not a battlefield. But it was ranked high and definitely not to be underestimated. The leader began chanting some magic stuff to try and control the beast. The others tried slowing it down with spells, but the monster suddenly flipped out. Its eyes changed, it shrieked, and then it lunged, knocking the leader flat with one hit. Everyone around panicked as the thing showed signs of being poisonous. They tried to protect the leader, but the beast was moving too fast. Turns out, the chill guy had secretly given the beast something to mess with its mind, making it way more aggressive. He had warned the others earlier, but they didn't take him seriously. Now things were bad. As the monster aimed another attack, the chill guy jumped in, blocking it with a different weapon he'd kept hidden. He was annoyed that he had to step in when he was supposed to be taking it easy. Still, he held his ground and started using a unique spell of his own, wrapping energy around the beast and slowly locking it down. Meanwhile, the others were coughing from the lingering poison in the air, struggling to stay on their feet. The situation was rough, but thanks to the guy who'd been underestimated the whole time, things started to turn around. Chris showed skills that shocked everyone, especially Alois. Turns out, he knew how to use the same kind of magic Alois thought only his family could handle. Without much effort, Chris took control of the chains made from the magic and climbed onto the back of the monster like he'd done this kind of thing before. The beast started panicking, thrashing around, but Chris held tight. He steered it straight toward a steep drop. Alois tried to shout a warning, worried he didn't see it, but Chris had already scouted the area ahead of time and knew what he was doing. Right at the edge, Chris pulled out a special weapon he'd hidden and took the beast down in one clean strike. Its color shifted right before it dropped, almost like it had felt real fear for the first time. After the fight, the rest of the group rushed over, worried about the cave and the danger still around. But Chris just brushed it off, making jokes and giving the others a hard time for panicking. Tension started rising again as Alois got annoyed, especially since Chris had clearly tampered with some of the supplies earlier. Still, Alois calmed down and admitted that Chris had saved them. It was rare for him to show that kind of gratitude, and Chris was caught off guard. He even felt a little guilty, though not enough to stop teasing. Before they could head out, the entire place began rumbling. The air turned heavy and the ground shook. A deep pressure pushed down on them all, and everyone started to stumble. Suddenly, massive glowing eyes appeared from the darkness. A terrifying presence filled the cave. It was something far worse than the beast they just defeated. Chris recognized it instantly as a being tied to an old legend. Alois, clearly frightened, tried to get Chris to leave since he wasn't even supposed to be involved. But Chris wasn't backing down. He noticed someone hiding above them, Simon, who had been secretly watching the whole time through a magical creature. Chris quickly threw his weapon at it, cutting the connection before Simon could react. Simon, surprised, realized he'd lost his chance to teleport in and help immediately. With his trick gone, it would take him precious minutes to arrive using his fastest method. Simon wasn't evil, just messing around too long. Now, with the danger right in front of them, he hurried to fix things. Meanwhile, the demon took an interest in Chris, amused by how bold he was. It mocked him, clearly seeing him as no real threat. Chris didn't care about the demon's words, he just hated being spied on. But deep down, even he was starting to feel the pressure of what was coming. Chris looked up at the towering threat in front of him. Compared to the monsters he'd fought in ancient battles, this one wasn't the strongest, but it was definitely out of his league right now. Still, he had a few tricks up his sleeve. With a calm breath, he raised a hand to the sky and released a soft wave of magic, putting almost everyone around him into a deep sleep, including Alois' squad, who were just about to rush in blindly. Alois tried to resist, but Chris dealt with him quickly, knocking the fight right out of him and putting him down gently. He didn't want any distractions, especially when he knew what kind of enemy stood before them. The demon, amused, made an offer: surrender the others and walk away free. But Chris had no interest in deals. He never played nice with monsters like this. He pulled out the sacred blade he carried, even if it hadn't worked for him before. The demon mocked him, saying the sword was useless in his hands. Then it attacked. A burst of raw energy slammed into Chris, sending him crashing into the stone wall. The impact knocked him out cold. The demon lifted him with ease, offering a final chance to hand over the others, in exchange for his life. But Chris woke up, refusing to give in. He broke free with a move that caught the demon off guard, flipping back to the ground. As he stood, a strange energy began to gather. The broken blade in his hand started to glow, slowly fixing itself. Something deep within him had changed. The demon, now clearly unsettled, questioned how someone like him could harness the power of light. Chris didn't say much, just braced himself and let the energy build. The ground beneath him cracked slightly as a surge of power burst outward. With one final move, he sent a massive wave of glowing energy at the demon. The monster couldn't block it. It screamed as the wave hit, and its body dropped, unmoving. Chris stood, barely able to hold himself together. His strength had run dry, his vision blurred, and the world around him started to spin. He collapsed, his body giving out. In the silence that followed, a voice from the past echoed in his head. Someone praising his skill, saying he had the potential to shine brighter than those who came before him. Even if he wasn't accepted, his path was meant to change the world. As he lay there on the edge of consciousness, a mysterious figure stepped out of the shadows. A woman touched the ground beside him, intrigued by what she saw. She introduced herself as a powerful name from a distant realm, someone who had just taken interest in him. Soon after, help arrived. People with healing supplies rushed in, trying to save him. Just before everything faded to black, Chris heard her say that she'd be watching his next move closely. And then, the scene quietly shifted to a grand estate, far from the chaos, where more plans were already being set in motion. Chris slowly woke up, feeling groggy. His head was pounding, and he couldn't believe he'd just been lying there for 2 full days. It felt like a complete waste, even if his body didn't seem to be injured. As he looked around, he spotted a familiar object nearby, one of the pills he'd been carrying. At least something went right. He thought back to that strange woman who showed up before he passed out. He really didn't like the attention she gave him. Sometimes people who stand out early attract the interest of demons, and those demons might try to give them power. But that kind of gift wasn't something he ever wanted. He wasn't a villain. And in any case, she didn't seem like one of the top-ranking monsters either. Just then, a huge man walked into the room, broad shoulders, a lion-like presence. This was the head of the household where Chris had ended up, Count of the Tyreman family. The man asked how Chris was holding up. Chris greeted him respectfully and tried to get up, but the Count insisted he stay in bed. Chris felt confused. The last time they spoke, this guy hadn't exactly treated him kindly. The Count began to explain. Yesterday, they sent a team to investigate the cave. Apparently, someone had messed with a powerful magic seal that was supposed to keep the entrance to a dangerous realm shut. Whatever happened, it briefly allowed something to slip through. Even if the breach only lasted a moment, it could have ended in disaster. The Count believed they were lucky it ended so quickly. Chris thought about it. The idea of a reverse summon didn't really make sense, but if that's what they believed, it meant no one would question what really happened. That worked out in his favor. Then, the Count surprised him. He apologized. He admitted that he'd judged Chris based on rumors and assumptions, calling him worthless without knowing the truth. Now, after what Chris had done, he was genuinely thankful. Chris accepted the apology calmly. He said he only did what he thought was right, especially as someone connected by blood. While it stung to stretch the truth, he played along, keeping things vague. To his surprise, that seemed to really move the Count, who said that if Chris ever needed anything, he'd do what he could, as long as it wasn't unreasonable. Chris thought for a moment and made a request. He asked the Count to stop the long-standing tension between his family and another, House Khazar. Instead of acting like enemies, he hoped they could build something more positive, a rivalry with respect, where they could both improve and move forward together. Something fitting for relatives tied by heritage. Before the Count could respond, Chris added that he probably already knew what was behind the conflict. The main family didn't like it when the branch families got too close. If they worked together, it might challenge the authority of the main bloodline, so the division was likely stirred up on purpose, to keep the branches weak and divided. The Count was quiet, taking it all in. He asked if Chris was trying to spark a rebellion. Chris denied it. He wasn't aiming for anything like that. The Count was shocked that he'd thought that far ahead. After a moment, he smiled slightly and agreed. For the first time in a long while, he'd reach out to House Khazar. But instead of calling Chris by his title, he called him by name, showing a bit of respect that hadn't been there before. Chris smiled to himself, feeling confident. He was starting to see how bringing different families together one by one could build a strong alliance when things got tough. The Count gave Alois a light pat on the back, hinting that it was his turn to speak up. Clearly a little embarrassed, Alois held out a small item to Chris. It was one of the rare pills. He explained that he found it lying on the ground in the cave and decided to hold on to it since Chris hadn't woken up. Chris teased him a little, joking about how generous Alois was being. That set Alois off, barking back at him while the Count just laughed. Instead of letting Alois argue, the Count handed Chris a new item himself, a summoning crystal that could hold a powerful beast. Chris immediately recognized how rare that kind of tool was. The Count also said he'd support Chris joining an upcoming important ritual, wishing him success. Chris thanked him for both the support and the gift. As the Count and Alois left the room, Chris stayed lying down, still smiling. Then, without turning, he told someone to stop hiding. From behind a curtain, a man stepped out, his presence giving off a strong red energy. It was Simon, a butler from Chris's clan. Chris already knew someone had been hiding. He could sense the blood in the air. He recalled the name Simon, realizing this wasn't just any servant. This man used to be part of a terrifying group that didn't care who they hurt. Whether it was the light or dark side, they caused destruction for fun. Their leader was so powerful, he rose to become a high-level demon lord. Chris hadn't forgotten how dangerous they were, especially Simon, who was related to that leader by blood. Simon was impressed by what Chris had done. He knew the demon had been completely destroyed with no trace left behind, not just dismissed or sent back. He asked how Chris pulled it off, hinting that the truth needed to be shared with the higher-ups. Chris didn't feel like giving away his secrets. He said if he were the clan head, he'd prefer someone who kept their power hidden rather than someone who bragged about it. Simon seemed surprised but amused, clearly seeing potential in Chris. Chris then pointed out something important. While everyone else thought the demon vanished because of a failed summon, Simon seemed to know better. The only way he'd know it wasn't just a mistake was if he had been the one calling the demon in the first place. That kind of forbidden summoning could have led to chaos, especially if the clan found out. Simon realized Chris had figured it all out. Chris offered to stay quiet about it, but now Simon owed him. It wasn't just a favor anymore, it was leverage. Simon agreed, a bit caught off guard but respectful. He said he wouldn't forget what Chris did, and looked forward to seeing him again when Chris eventually made it to the main family's estate. Chris talks about how Simon is going to play a big role during a future disaster, so it's super important he builds some kind of bond to help change what's coming. Meanwhile, Mary finishes up getting things ready for them to head back, and Chris praises her work. Alois pops in just as Chris is about to leave, acting casual, but Chris reminds him not to forget what he promised. He has to start calling him Big Bro from now on. Alois tries to brush it off, saying he's older, but Chris presses him, asking if he had something to say. Alois gets serious and warns Chris. He says that even though they're all kind of like family, what Chris is about to do isn't something light. He should be careful. Alois mentions how the ones from the main bloodline, especially someone named Loin, aren't too happy about Chris showing up to a certain powerful event. Those with direct blood ties already have stronger magic, better training, and rare items, while people from side families like Chris are way behind. Chris just laughs it off and gives Alois some advice in return. He tells him not to get involved in the event either, hinting that it's not safe. Alois insists he's only trying to help and doesn't want Chris to hog all the energy, but Chris says it won't matter. Whoever goes against him will regret it. That gets Alois a little mad, and Chris decides it's time to leave, telling him to think it over. Later on, Chris goes back to Count Khazar's house. Thorn, his younger brother, hears that Chris has gone off to train by himself. When Thorn finally finds him, he formally greets Chris and reminds him of a promise they made to spar. Chris is surprised at how fast Thorn has grown in strength and realizes Thorn is also planning to enter that powerful event. He tells Thorn to wait and not fight just yet. They'll spar after he finishes his own training. Thorn doesn't seem too happy about the delay but agrees. As Chris watches him walk away, he thinks Thorn is one stubborn kid. A girl nearby points out how Thorn reminds Chris of someone else, and he quietly agrees. Later that night, Chris is alone in his room, looking at a dark-colored pill. He only has a couple of weeks left before the big event, so he bites into it, even though it tastes awful. He lies back and starts focusing, trying to absorb the pill's energy. The energy is wild and more chaotic than he expected. As it spreads through him, he suddenly senses something strange, an unusual light force mixed in with the dark. He figures that the powerful feelings from whatever creature died to make the pill must have stuck around inside it. Usually, people like him wouldn't be able to take in both kinds of energy and would need help to get rid of the light part. But Chris decides to do things differently. He's going to keep all of it. So he lets both the dark and light energy flow through his body, each going to the right place. He plans to absorb everything, no waste. That way he'll use every bit of power the pill has to offer. Chris wakes up to a blinding light that quickly fades into deep darkness as he closes his eyes again, lost in his thoughts. Somewhere else, a woman named Eileen is going over some recent updates. One of her people reports back, telling her about an incident involving a demon during a black pill mission. It took him longer to investigate because of the unexpected trouble, but he made it through and brought back the details. She quietly reviews a photo of Chris while processing everything she's just learned. Then, time skips ahead by 2 weeks. Thorn, full of energy and excitement, knocks on Chris's door. Today's the day they agreed to fight. As he steps in, he's surprised by the change in Chris. His power feels way heavier than it did just a couple of weeks ago. Thorn doesn't back down though. He's still determined to prove himself. Chris, clearly not holding back anymore, tells Thorn that if he loses, he should step away from the upcoming competition. Thorn doesn't understand why he's being told to quit before even getting a chance to try. But the fight starts, and Chris easily overpowers him. Next thing we know, Thorn's laid out in the recovery room, injured. Their father thinks Chris went too far, especially since the healer says Thorn needs to rest for a couple of weeks. That means he'll miss the event. Thorn wants to argue, but Chris asks for some time alone with him. Once everyone leaves, Chris approaches and tries to clear things up. He explains that he didn't hurt Thorn out of spite. He actually did it to protect him. Competing in the event right now could ruin Thorn's chances of reaching his full potential. He needed to be tough on him because Thorn is too stubborn to listen otherwise. More importantly, Chris tells him that the kind of energy Thorn's trying to get isn't even the one that fits him best. While others are chasing after raw, dark energy, Thorn is better matched with something slightly different, something powerful in its own way, and better suited for magic involving curses and unique effects. Chris figured this out during their sparring and knows that forcing the wrong kind of energy now could hold Thorn back later. He wants Thorn to be strong, but in his own way, and not just following everyone else. This isn't about stopping him. It's about making sure he chooses the right path and that he's ready for it. Chris even gives him a rare and valuable item to help him recover and grow stronger. Thorn is overwhelmed by the gesture and starts getting emotional. But that emotion brings up something deeper. Thorn remembers how cold and distant Chris was in the past, especially during hard times like their mother's final moments. He questions why Chris is suddenly showing so much care now when he didn't back then. Chris sits beside him, quietly admitting that he didn't get it before. He couldn't understand things the way he does now. Later, we see the carriages arriving, marking the beginning of a new chapter, with both brothers changed in different ways. One recovering, the other preparing for what lies ahead. As soon as Chris steps out of the carriage, he stretches and complains about how sore he is from the trip. He grumbles that it wouldn't have hurt anyone to just use a warp gate instead of making him ride all the way, thinking that things will definitely be different once he's the one in charge. Suddenly, Mary shows up all excited, acting like they're going on some sort of romantic getaway. Chris just brushes it off, reminding himself that he could only bring her along because of their bond. She's basically stuck with him, and he wasn't allowed to choose anyone else. As they walk, Chris notices people whispering and glancing his way. Mary points out that he's already getting attention, like a local celebrity or something. Then Simon appears and respectfully greets Chris, calling him by a title that shocks the crowd. Some people nearby can't believe someone like Simon is treating Chris that way. They still see him as a nobody. Simon tells him that even though it's only been a short time, Chris has made serious progress. Chris acts unimpressed and jokes about how the higher-ups must have way too much free time if they're checking up on him personally. Simon says that the top elder actually sent him and he wants to meet Chris face to face. Chris plays it cool, but Simon doesn't buy it. He can tell Chris was expecting something like this. Next, we're in a large, serious-looking room. Simon brings Chris before the elder and Mary is already there. The moment Chris enters, he feels the overwhelming pressure in the room. The elder's energy is so intense that just being near him makes Chris feel like he might collapse. His hands tremble as he respectfully bows. The elder asks if Chris was caught off guard by the sudden meeting. Chris says not really. He figured something like this might happen. The elder asks why, and Chris explains that when someone new with potential shows up, people in power tend to notice. The elder laughs and agrees, but says he still doesn't know whether Chris will turn out to be something special or just fade away with time. Chris stays humble, saying he's still got a long way to go, but who knows? He might just grow into something greater than anyone expects. That response seems to amuse the elder. He finally dismisses Chris, saying he'll be watching him closely. Once Chris leaves, the elder asks Marion what she thinks of him. She says nothing, but the elder says Chris is more impressive than he expected. Still, having that much talent often brings trouble too. He knows the region's heading into chaos, but at least now, a small light of hope has appeared. Marion seems surprised by this shift in tone. Then the scene shifts again. It's the night before the big event everyone's been waiting for. A grand announcement is made as Chris arrives in full style, dressed to kill. Some people in the crowd still doubt him, wondering what someone like him is even doing there. A few of them mock his looks, saying he just seems like a show-off. Chris, hearing the comments, jokes to himself that he's just too good-looking for his own good. Mary, ever loyal, agrees and hypes him up even more. As Chris heads toward the refreshment table, he spots some drinks and casually reaches for one. But before he can grab anything, a server stops him, saying he's not old enough for that. Instead, she offers him a non-alcoholic drink, something like a spicy soda. Chris, clearly disappointed, just takes it and moves on. Chris finds himself stuck in a room with a bunch of people who don't seem all that impressive. They even start laughing at him, which only annoys him more. He doesn't want the soft drinks they're offering. He's looking for something stronger. The gathering then shifts as a group of important young nobles starts arriving. The room quiets down as the doors open slowly and they step in. There's one guy Chris already knows. He's the second-rank noble. Another one is a girl he's heard about, and two others are new to him. But someone's missing. There are only 4 of them instead of 5. Chris notices and wonders if the one who caused him all that trouble before just didn't show up. When the gnome noble walks past him without even a glance, Chris feels irritated. He expected at least some kind of reaction. One of the girls gives him a polite nod, which surprises him too. He remembers being warned about her, but she doesn't seem dangerous right now. He figures he'll think more about it later. For now, it's time to leave and get ready for what's coming next. Just as he's about to go, a servant appears. He introduces himself as working under one of the nobles and starts throwing shade, suggesting someone in the upcoming ritual isn't qualified and might mess things up. Chris quickly realizes the guy's talking about him. The servant says he just wants proof that Chris is worthy. Chris looks up and sees the noble his servant works for watching from above, clearly full of himself. Chris shrugs it off and says he's ready for anything. The servant backs off, saying it's not the right place to fight. Chris mocks him a bit, saying he doesn't need weapons to handle someone like him. Things get tense. Suddenly, the spirits the servant summoned turn against him instead of helping him. Everyone's shocked. Chris just relaxes, enjoying the moment, while the spirits even treat him like a VIP. The guests whisper among themselves, confused how Chris took control so fast. Chris hints that this must have been planned by the noble above, but the guy denies everything. Chris doesn't buy it, but lets it slide, for now. He says they'll meet again during the ritual. The next day, Chris arrives yawning like he couldn't care less. Someone teases him for not being nervous after all that drama, but Chris brushes it off. The noble from before walks in, acting like he owns the place. Chris smirks, ready for what's next. An older man steps forward and says it's time. He's the assistant butler, and he's leading everyone to the sacred place where the ritual happens. He taps the ground, and some wild colors appear. A strange path forms below them, like something out of a dream. As they start following the old man, the path gets weird, twisting and turning, going downward like a slide. People are freaking out because they feel like they're falling underground. The path keeps moving, and some people start dropping off into the empty space below. The old man doesn't slow down, he goes even faster. More participants start falling behind. The arrogant noble is still pretending he's fine, but he's clearly struggling. That's when Chris casually moves past him without a sweat. The noble watches in disbelief, wondering how Chris is doing it so easily. Chris, calm as ever, just keeps moving while the others try to keep up. Chris watched everyone around him struggling and panting while he looked totally fine. He thought it was pointless to push themselves so hard in a place that wasn't even real. Since it was all just an illusion, he figured out how to move through it without draining any energy. With a small trick, he basically became untouchable in that space. One of the elders seemed to recognize who he was and looked pretty impressed. Eventually, the whole group reached their destination. Most were completely worn out. Chris, however, didn't even break a sweat. One of the others questioned how he could stay so fresh. But Chris figured it was just because most of them relied too much on shortcuts and hadn't properly trained their bodies. The room started glowing as a crystal floated into the air. A new person appeared, someone in charge of the ritual site. She explained that they were now standing in a sacred area known for its intense dark energy. Their mission? To collect a rare source of that darkness, similar to what a legendary dark warrior once used. A pattern of blue light spread across the ground and wrapped around each participant. The guide explained that the power wasn't unlimited, only the worthy would claim it. Creatures hidden within the realm would test them. The faster they moved, the better their chances. Everyone would take different paths to avoid direct battles, but if they did cross paths, they were warned not to fight. Wasting time would just benefit the others. As the countdown finished, they all took off down separate routes. The two elders joked around about who would win, but one of them vanished, leaving the other hanging. On his path, Loin moved quickly and came across a pack of magical creatures. They looked fierce, but weren't too high level. With a few well-aimed moves, he took them down easily, feeling confident. He thought to himself that Chris must be struggling somewhere with stronger enemies. After all, he secretly paid someone to make Chris's path tougher. Loin believed his plan would get rid of Chris once and for all. He was certain no one would question it if something bad happened during the trial. But when he reached what he believed was the final chamber, he was shocked to see Chris already waiting there, bored. He couldn't understand how Chris got through so fast. He blurted out part of his own scheme by mistake, and Chris quickly put the pieces together. Loin tried to deny it, but it was too late. They were alone, and Chris wasn't in the mood for small talk. Loin decided to attack, thinking he could end it quickly, but Chris dodged everything without even trying hard. Loin got frustrated and went in for a strong hit, thinking he saw a weak spot. Chris grabbed his wrist mid-attack, twisted it, and with a loud crack, took him down easily. A little later, another participant, Alice, showed up only to find both Loin and someone else already knocked out. He tried to step up, saying he was ready, but Chris dropped him just as easily. Afterward, Chris stood over them, saying that he couldn't afford to share the dark power with anyone. He explained, at least to himself, that in 5 years, a huge war would begin, and to win it, he needed the full strength of the Dark Clan. No one else could have a piece of that power. It all had to be his. With the others dealt with, he stepped forward to claim the sacred darkness for himself, a force that could turn someone into a true legendary being. Among the demon monarchs, one of the strongest figures is the Duke, who managed to absorb most of the dark energy, an insane amount. But there's another guy, known as the Dark Destroyer, who went even further and took in over 90% of it to rise to the level of a demon king. Now, imagine this. If someone could handle the full 100%, they'd be even stronger than the Demon Emperor himself. So now, there's this dude Chris standing in front of this sacred darkness, trying to do exactly that. He starts absorbing it slowly, letting it flow through every part of his body. Meanwhile, others watching are stunned. Everyone else who tried was already knocked out, except Chris. That alone was shocking. But things are a mess outside. Loin, a young master, is seriously injured, and people are getting suspicious. They think Chris must have cheated or used some secret item. Some of them even want to punish him, but another person brushes it off, saying he probably won't even survive the sacred ground. It's been 2 days and Chris still hasn't come out. People assume he's been overwhelmed and destroyed by the dark energy. Even the Duke couldn't go past a certain point, so it's easy to believe Chris is gone for good. No body left behind, nothing. One woman, clearly angry, shuts the door behind her. She's got a personal grudge. After her dad died during a war, only she and Loin were taken in by their uncle. Her position in the clan is shaky, and with Loin failing to gain the sacred darkness, things look worse. She blames Chris for the whole mess and swears she'll get back at him. Others keep mocking Chris, thinking he's dead, saying he got what he deserved for being too ambitious. Even the girl who serves Chris is holding on to hope though. She defends him fiercely, warns the haters to back off, and says she believes her master will return. Deep down, she's just waiting, heart full of hope. Back inside, Chris is struggling big time. He's only managed to absorb about 70%, but it feels like it's choking the life out of him. He knows the hardest part will hit around 90%, and if he pushes too far, his inner core might break, killing him before he ever gets to prove himself. He suddenly remembers, dragons have strong cores, way stronger than a human's. If he could just copy that for a short time, he might survive. He tries it, and more energy flows in. But even then, his body is on the edge, and he's about to stop. Out of nowhere, he sees a woman appear in this dark subspace. She's powerful and calm. She offers to help, saying it's something demons can do in this kind of darkness. Her reason? She just felt like it. No conditions, no deals. With her help, he has a shot at taking in all of the sacred darkness. Fast forward a week. Outside, the Duke is sipping his drink, thinking Chris is probably gone. No word, no sign. Others wonder why Chris even pushed so hard, and some leaders are considering closing off the sacred ground completely. But before that happens, the Duke decides to wait just one more day, just in case. Maybe, just maybe, the reckless kid is still hanging in there. One more day to see if the impossible actually happened. In a world where dark energy flows like a river, Chad finds himself in a dire situation. His heart races, and he feels like it could burst at any moment. A demoness, who seems to be a maternal figure, urges him to take her hand and escape the impending doom. But Chad, stubborn as ever, refuses her help. She warns him that there are limits to what humans can endure, but he brushes off her concern. Suddenly, Chad's demeanor changes dramatically. He begins to glow. His hair shifts to a striking gray, and his eyes blaze a fierce red. Horns sprout from his head, marking his transformation into a demon. This shocking change is known as demonization, a powerful yet dangerous technique from the Mystic clan. It temporarily grants him immense abilities, but comes with a heavy price. Many have perished using it, including someone named Lena. Chad, however, has a plan. He remembers what the Fox Girl taught him about the demon clans and realizes that if he can strip away the parts of the spell that amplify dark energy, he can harness this world's dark energy without suffering any consequences. As he concentrates, he forms a bowl with his hands, and dark energy begins to swirl and gather within it. To his amazement, he manages to collect energy with over 90% purity, creating something he calls sacred darkness. Demoness watches in disbelief as Chad forms a black crescent, something she thought impossible for a mere human. She realizes he has surpassed the limits of humanity, and Chad, feeling proud, tells her it's all thanks to his genius. As he prepares to leave, he casually informs her that she can continue her existence, but he's done with her. Just before the portal closes, he cheekily gives her the middle finger, leaving her momentarily stunned before she bursts into laughter. Once outside, Chad curses her under his breath, vowing he never wants to see her again. He wonders how much time has passed and figures it must be about a week. Knowing his family is likely in chaos, he decides it's time for a little mischief. Meanwhile, back at the family estate, a butler rushes into the Lord's office, announcing that Chad has returned. The room erupts in shock. Everyone is stunned that he's still alive. The acting head, a man they call Donkey, demands details. The butler explains that Chad survived but is utterly exhausted. A healer has noted that he's sensing pure dark energy, but it's all jumbled up, making it hard for him to use it effectively. Donkey curses Chad, questioning what they could expect from someone like him. Another hefty man suggests that Chad should be held accountable for this mess. With a cold expression, Donkey takes note of the situation and dismisses everyone. Once they leave, he asks one of his aides if the report about Chad is accurate. The aide confirms that Chad was seen with a healer, indicating something went wrong with his core. Donkey, deep in thought, taps his fingers on the table, making the aide increasingly nervous. He contemplates how Chad was meant to become the young lord, a pawn in their grand scheme involving the Poison Magic clan. He mentions a plan to eradicate something called Jupi, which has now been postponed. The aide remains silent, feeling the pressure of Donkey's cold demeanor. After a few more moments of tense silence, Donkey orders the aide to bring Chad to the Darkness Hall. The next day, he plans to announce Chad's fate in front of the vassals. When Chad is summoned, he senses that they're plotting against him, gathering all the important figures for this meeting. Donkey confronts Chad about the sins he committed during the sacred rites. Chad acknowledges his actions, all while Donkey observes the distortion in his core. When asked to elaborate, Chad boldly states that his peers are unworthy of their lineage, implying he should have dealt with them even more harshly. As the tension in the room escalates, an unattractive woman in a sharp suit glares at Chad, clearly furious. Donkey, the acting head, explains that Chad's major blunder was monopolizing the Dark Magic clan's precious resources without producing results that matched that privilege. Chad, curious, asks how Donkey came to that conclusion. Donkey states that a purity level of 70% is the minimum standard. Chad, unfazed, inquires about the consequences if his purity falls below that threshold. The woman, with a fish-like face, chimes in, saying that if Chad fails, he won't inherit any dark magic techniques. On top of that, he would be permanently barred from the main house and lose his claim to the House of K. Kaza. Chad pretends to be indifferent, questioning how they plan to measure his purity since it seems even they can't fully assess it. That's when a guy pretending to be Eski raises his hand, offering to help. He explains that even though Chad's core is in chaos, a dark energy clash could determine his purity level. If Chad can overpower him, it would prove he has achieved greater purity. The idea is simple. In a dark energy clash, the one with higher purity will overpower the other instantly, given they both start with the same amount of energy. Chad thinks this is a perfect opportunity to test his strength, but he also realizes that this guy is more cunning than he initially thought. Chad sets a condition. If he achieves a significant result, they must support him in his quest to take the test for the young lord. This proposal shocks a few people in the room, but his brother, the one they call the Turd, surprisingly agrees. He argues that it doesn't matter if someone is from the direct bloodline or a branch family. Anyone aiming for the young lord position should be given a chance. The others remain silent, realizing that in the Magic Empire, strength is what truly matters. As Chad steps onto the stage, he warns the Turd that if he doesn't control his dark energy properly during the clash, it could damage his core. To keep things fair, he decides to use only beginner-level 2-star dark energy. As they both prepare to unleash their energy, Chad tells the Turd he doesn't need to hold back and should focus on protecting his own core. The Turd, feeling challenged, gets excited at Chad's words. When they finally clash, Chad easily overpowers the Turd's 2-star dark energy. The Turd is left stunned, realizing that his energy was completely nullified without Chad even needing to exert himself. He tries again, this time using expert-level 2-star energy, but the outcome remains the same. Chad, unimpressed, mocks the Turd for his weakness, pushing him further. The The turd, now enraged, releases a powerful aura, revealing that he's using 4-star dark energy. If it connects, it could seriously damage Chad's core. A dragon-like energy swirls around him, but Chad counters with his own dark energy, forming a massive claw that dwarfs the dragon. Chad warns the turd again about the risks of losing control during an energy clash, and as their energies collide, the backlash causes the turd to cough up blood. Chad pulls back his energy, thinking he should have shattered the turd's core. Cleverly, he announces to everyone that he has a purity level of at least 90%. The room falls silent in shock, and Chad turns to the Lord, asserting that he now has the right to pursue the title of Young Lord. The atmosphere is thick with disbelief as everyone processes what just happened. Donkey, the acting head, sits there, his face a mask of shock, though he doesn't show it. He continues his annoying habit of tapping on the table, then informs Chad that as promised he can take the test for the Young Lord. However, he adds that no one from a branch family has ever taken this test before. He plans to randomly select a challenge for Chad, which makes Chad think that it's likely to be something impossible to pass. Donkey explains that Chad's qualifications will be assessed in 2 parts. First, he must demonstrate his talents, and then he needs to accomplish something worthy of a young lord. Chad asks how he's supposed to prove his talent, and Donkey sets the bar high. He must reach 3-star level within 3 months. Chad, unfazed, simply thinks to himself that this is a piece of cake for someone as talented as he is. Donkey remains silent, but there's a hint of anticipation in his eyes as he looks forward to seeing what Chad can achieve in that time. Later that day, in a quiet room, Donkey sits across from another guy, sipping tea. He expresses his disappointment in Eski, blaming him for underestimating Chad. Because of this miscalculation, even his own core took a hit, and they need to deal with Chad quickly before he becomes a real threat. He reassures his junior that they shouldn't worry too much, explaining that they intentionally avoid absorbing more than 70% of pure dark energy. The reason is simple. The higher the purity of the absorbed energy, the harder it becomes to raise its rank. It's a steep climb, and achieving just a 3-star level will take much longer for someone like Chad, who has absorbed 90%. Meanwhile, Chad is enjoying a meal prepared by Marie, who tells him that news of his recent performance has spread throughout the mansion. She beams with pride, saying her heart swells for him. Chad feels a bit embarrassed by the attention. Marie confesses that while waiting for him, she realized her true feelings for him, and every day without him felt like an eternity. This hits Chad hard, making him reflect on his past. In another part of the world, the fox girl worries about Chad, while a saint reassures her that with his agility, he's unlikely to get hurt. Rania, another character, urges him to take her hand, and the fox girl admits she's genuinely worried about him. This makes her blush, especially when she remembers that even the hero was concerned about Chad. Back with Chad, he feels a wave of happiness wash over him, thinking about how he escaped a hellish existence where death seemed like the only option. His life had been filled with violence until he met people who showed him kindness. As Marie prepares a special drink, Chad finally finds his voice, thanking her for waiting for him. She blushes, realizing he's finally understood her feelings. Chad teases her, saying she doesn't even have a heart to begin with. Marie, in a cheesy way, claims that her heart was stolen by him. To reward her for her patience, Chad offers to take her for a walk. She gets overly excited, dressing up for the occasion. Chad can't help but admire her, thinking it's nice to relax for a bit, even though he knows he has to reach 3-star level in 3 months. He realizes it's going to be a tight squeeze, especially since he's dealing with over 90% darkness on his own, even with the help of branch family tutors. Just then, a voice interrupts his thoughts, criticizing him for wandering around and causing trouble. Turning around, he sees his aunt, who greets him. She questions whether this is the right time for him to be meandering in the garden and asks if he's found a teacher for his training. Chad jokingly asks if it's her, but she surprises him by saying it's someone else entirely. He tells Aya Marie to leave, promising to see her at dinner. As he walks down the stairs with his aunt, he expresses gratitude for her concern about his training. She warns him that he shouldn't be too thankful, explaining that he'll soon understand what he's in for. She mentions that not even one of her siblings could keep up with this teacher's training style. She emphasizes that this opportunity is rare, so he better not let it slip away. As they reach the bottom of the stairs, Chad is taken aback when he sees a kid in front of them. He wonders why someone who looks like they're 200 or 300 years old is dressed up like a child. Chris saw a small kid standing nearby and, without thinking much, gave the child a gentle pat on the head and casually asked where his parents were. But the look the kid gave him, it was cold. Serious enough to send a shiver down his spine. Something about that stare wasn't normal. That's when it finally clicked for Chris. He had just made a big mistake. His aunt quickly stepped in and told him to be more careful. This wasn't just any child. This was the reincarnation of their clan's leader. Realizing how serious this was, Chris immediately changed his tone and greeted the kid respectfully. As he took a closer look, Chris sensed a powerful aura coming from the boy, dense and dark like heavy fog. He was stunned to realize the kid had already tapped into more than 90% of the sacred dark force. That was an insane level to reach, especially at such a young age. Chris acknowledged the achievement, but deep down, he knew it was a risky move. Still, he didn't argue. He respected the kid's choice. An elder nearby, someone who had walked the path of darkness himself, spoke up. He mentioned how, when he had reached 80%, the challenges became almost impossible. The pressure, the resistance. It wasn't like anything normal folks could handle. Even the founder of their clan needed help from the Demon Emperor to get that far. And now, Chris had already surpassed that. The future looked rough. Wanting to help, the elder offered to pull some of the energy back and turn it into ether, basically to lighten the load. He said Chris had enough skill to manage 80%, but going beyond that was dangerous. Too much power too fast could destroy him. But before he could finish, Chris interrupted with a question that caught even his aunt off guard. He asked, why had their clan become so weak? It was a question no one usually dared to ask, and even the elder was taken aback. But Chris didn't hesitate. He said that while their dark clan wasn't as elite as the mystic or undead magic clans, the ones known as near untouchable, they were still part of the top 12 noble families. Yet somehow, they were seen as the weakest of them all. The elder asked him why. Chris explained that while their clan had made huge progress in recent years thanks to the current leader, the outside world still didn't take them seriously, and the reason was simple. They didn't have enough true monsters, not enough people who had passed the absolute stage. Those with power ranked above 8.5 tiers. Without warriors at that level, their reputation couldn't keep up, no matter how strong the lower ranks were. After hearing all of that, the old kid just stays silent. He knows what's coming. In the future, when the Demon King of Carnage strikes the Dark Magic clan, things won't look good. By then, Nordion will already be gone, and only a handful of 7-star fiends will remain. Along with the clan's 10,000 soldiers, they'll try to fight back, but they'll lose. In the end, they'll be crushed and forced to serve the Demon King. That's how important those top-tier fighters, those above the beast star level, really are. So it's no surprise the Elder Clan head is worried. The old kid says he gets it, but he's still concerned. He's afraid that carrying too much dark energy might crush him and stop his growth. Chris then throws a question his way. What if this power isn't just about helping the clan? What if it pushes him beyond limits and turns him into something even greater? The old kid laughs, saying Chris really knows how to make things sound dramatic. But he's not backing down. He says he won't regret his choice. Then, dark energy starts forming under his feet, and within seconds, he's pulled into a shadowy pool. Next thing he knows, he wakes up in a forest. A voice speaks, telling him his first mission is to absorb the pure, dark energy and survive. He's confused, but before he can react, a two-headed bear shows up behind him, ready to attack. Somewhere far away, Chris's aunt is watching through a magical screen. She's shocked and asks the clan head if it's okay to throw a 2-star kid into a 4-star beast zone. The clan head doesn't respond. He just summons another monster, a rock lizard. The aunt feels bad, thinking maybe her words made things worse for Chris. The old kid, still watching from his couch, says this is how someone truly understands the nature of dark energy, by being pushed to the edge. He just hopes Chris doesn't end up badly hurt. Then he casually asks Marion if she's got the sweets ready. She brings out a box and he starts munching like crazy, joking that dark energy always makes him crave sugar, and turns off the lights, excited to see how his grandson will do in this real trial. Back in the forest, Chris is now facing both the bear and the rock lizard. One wrong move and it's game over. The lizard spits some kind of acid that melts a tree in seconds, but Chris manages to dodge it just in time. Even though it's technically training, it feels like a life or death battle. Chris tries calling out to the clan head, asking if he's watching. He figures there must be a reason behind all this, and maybe the message is simple. If you want answers, beat something stronger than you. His aunt watches in silence, thinking the clan head just wants to see Chris get tossed around. But Chris doesn't care. He smirks and gets ready to go all in. He's planning to finish it in one strike.